This session is a review over the Gilded Age. We tend to look for patterns on the STAR test, and as teachers, we have noticed that the Gilded Age is usually heavily tested, meaning that out of these 60 plus questions on the STAR test, you will see more than just a few about the Gilded Age. So we've already done our in-class review over this, but today's Super Saturday session will kind of go back over once again key vocabulary, people, and terms to know. On this slide, we are looking for what do you remember about the Gilded Age? So there could be several things that you could put in here. You could put corruption, you could put the growth of the cities, put factories, you could put political machines, you could put looks great on the outside, but bad underneath. Anything that you tend to remember from our earlier studies of the Gilded Age. What I always say for my students is the Gilded Age, I compare it to costume jewelry. From far away, you might see someone with a big old blinged out ring on their hand, and it looks so fancy, and you think, oh my goodness, they have to be so rich. Oh my gosh, look at that great jewelry they have. But what you don't know is that that's just gold plated. It is gilded jewelry. And once you take that ring off your finger at the end of the day, you're probably going to have this nice green line all around your hand, because if you scratch below the surface, it is of very poor quality. And that is a good representation of the United States during the Gilded Age. From far away, from outside looking in, we looked like we had it going on. The cities were booming and bustling, and people were doing all of these great things. But below the surface, there was a lot of corruption and inequality in the United States. One of the things that we see happening during the Gilded Age is the movement out west for multiple reasons. One of those is the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. And so here are some images that students sent me during our session. You see that iconic moment where the East and Western railroads come together in Promontory Point, Utah. You see on the map what these connections look like. That East Coast was finally thoroughly connected to the West Coast. New York was connected to California. So goods, services, and people can now move all about the United States with ease, which is going to kind of create this boom for business. There's two other reasons why people move out west during the Gilded Age. You have the Homestead Act and the Klondike Gold Rush. Land was very important, and there was plenty of land to be had on the Great Plains. So the Homestead Act gave settlers 160 acres of public land for a small fee, and just basically, hey, if you'll live on this land for 5 years, it's yours. So I always can compare that to what y'all's language is, that the cars. Y'all, everybody's getting their licenses. Everybody wants a nice car. So think of your dream car. And then what if someone showed up at your doorstep and said, hey, here's your dream car. Here's the keys. I just need you to take care of this car for me for 5 years, and it's yours. Keep it clean, keep the oil change, do all the maintenance, keep the tires looking good. And at the end of 5 years, this is your car. I think most of us would take that deal. Now, the other is the Klondike Gold Rush. And so we are all aware of the gold rush, and most of us think California, but on the STAR test, you need to also remember the Klondike Gold Rush, which was in Alaska. And so you have lots of settlers who take that risk to go up to Alaska and try to strike it rich mining for gold. It also creates boom towns and businesses along the way. So if you were one of these settlers during the Gilded Age, and I told you, okay, you have to go out west, which one would you rather do? Would you go and do the Homestead Act and, settle the Great Plains? Or would you press your luck and go up to Alaska and try to strike it rich mining for gold? Now, with this movement out west, we are going to see a culture clash on the Great Plains. So we need to remember the vocabulary term assimilation. And we used this image during our unit in class. And you may also see this image on the STAR test. Assimilation, in your own words, could mean several different things. You could put blending in. You could put, some students put the phrase whitewashing. You could put the phrase Americanization. Changing your culture. Any of those could be things to help you remember what assimilation is. Now, what I need you to remember about the American Indians and assimilation is that it was forced. Assimilation happens all the time. Foreign exchange students who come to Allen High School, they have to assimilate. I'm not originally from Texas. I grew up in Chicago. I had to assimilate when I moved to Texas 20 years ago because certain words or phrases that I used, nobody understood. If I was at a restaurant, I'm like, oh, what kind of pop do you have here? People would look at me funny because in Texas, we don't say pop. We say Cokes or sodas. What happens with the Native American Indians is that this was a forced assimilation, that their land was taken away from them. Their children, their teenagers were forced to go to the white men's schools where you can see this is the before and the after. Their hair was cut. Their traditional clothing was no longer allowed to be worn. They didn't get to speak their native languages. They didn't get to practice their native religions. And we stripped them of a lot of that culture. So you need to associate the word assimilation with the Native Americans, and specifically with the Dawes Act of 1887, where this took away tribal ownership of the land. It created the reservation system. And what we see is that Native Americans, they were given land back by the United States government, but it was usually the very unproductive land. It wasn't good for growing. It wasn't good weather. And so that is part of the treatment of the Native Americans during the Gilded Age. Now, focusing back to the cities, you need to remember this key phrase, industrialization. Think industrial, industry, factories. So in your mind, know that vocabulary term, industrialization means factories. The growth of manufacturing activity in an economy or region, usually accompanied by a decrease in the number of farms and farming. And that was true of the Gilded Age. We see the rise of factories. We see the rise of child labor. And remember, working in these factories was not at all fun or glamorous. You had long work days, 12, 14 hours with very little breaks. There was no minimum wage. You worked for very little. There was no safety equipment, safety mechanisms on these machines. So there was always that danger of getting hurt. There was the pollution from the factories in the cities. So again, not at all glamorous, but also a key part of the Gilded Age era. We see scientific innovations. In addition to the factories, you see the telephone invented by Alexander Graham Bell. You see America become dependent on petroleum-based products, meaning oil, which would be John D. Rockefeller and his Standard Oil Company during this time period. Steel production is revolutionized by the Bessemer process, which was a faster and cheaper way to make steel. Andrew Carnegie took advantage of that innovation and became very wealthy. And of course, we identified the railroad and its change with the transcontinental connection. For the Gilded Age, know that oil, steel, and the railroads were our three dominating industries in American economy. Steel was used to build the railroad lines, to build buildings in the cities. And so this picture was just a picture in which one do you think was most important? What I saw most from students was the telephone and oil. Another key vocabulary phrase to know is laissez-faire economics. And so this graphic gives you a good rundown of what that could look like. Basically, the government should not intervene in the economy. And I have taught my students over and over to know that that means hands off. The government should keep it hands off, jazz hands. We should not intervene in any way. And that's why we see so many unethical and illegal business practices happening during the Gilded Age. There was no one telling them, oh, that's unfair, you can't do that. Another term that you might see is free enterprise. So make sure you know that laissez-faire economics means hands off, means free enterprise. Now, with the growth of big business, I was asking the kids, what does the phrase big business mean to you? And so a lot of the kids told me monopolies. They told me no laws, phrases or people like Carnegie and Rockefeller popped up. And that's very true. Without that government regulation of being hands off, with laissez-faire of the government being hands off, no one was saying, oh, that's not fair, don't do that. And so these businesses were allowed to kind of dominate in an unfair way. Think of the Monopoly board game. You win when you put everyone else out of business. With the rise of big business in the Gilded Age, we need to remember these two vocabulary terms, entrepreneur and philanthropy. Entrepreneurs were any of those individuals who created new business, kind of taking those risks, but also reaping the rewards. And the four rich dudes or entrepreneurs of the Gilded Age were Cornelius Vanderbilt with the railroad, Andrew Carnegie with steel, John D. Rockefeller with oil, and J.P. Morgan with the banking industry. Philanthropy is essentially charitable acts. The government was really not addressing social issues during the Gilded Age, and so these wealthy industrialists or entrepreneurs took on that role to kind of further the betterment of society. When we talk about these entrepreneurs, we refer to them as either robber barons or captains of industry. And so over here, you can kind of see what defines each. I tell my kids to keep the C's and the R's together. When you're looking at C, captain of industry, these are the ones who are more into charity. So creating jobs, doing like better prices for consumers, giving money back to the community. And the best example of that is Andrew Carnegie. So captain of industry, charity, Carnegie. Robber barons, keep the R's together. They were ruthless. They were greedy. They exploited their workers. They were corrupt. They kind of felt they were above the law. So with ruthless robber barons, you would think John D. Rockefeller. So you see both during the Gilded Age. This one was just more of your opinion. How would you categorize these entrepreneurs? On the next slide, we see two more vocabulary terms, political machines and civil service reform. Now, the connection between these two is that political machines were the problem and civil service was the solution. Political machines dominated major cities during the Gilded Age. The best example of this is in New York City. We see the Tammany Hall political machine ran by Boss Tweed. Boss Tweed wasn't the mayor. He wasn't the governor. He held no government office, but he ran that city through his political machine, offering jobs and services to immigrants and the poor in exchange for votes, rigging elections, taking money, putting his friends in charge all over the place. The civil service reform through the Pendleton Act is going to begin to solve that problem. It said that jobs had to be given based on merit rather than loyalty. You would have to take a civil service exam to prove you were qualified for a job. So now Boss Tweed can't give a job to his best friend Joe just because he's been a loyal party worker. Instead, it has to go to someone who is qualified for that position. Another group of people that we see kind of rise up during the Gilded Age is the populist movement. And I've been telling my kiddos, populism, populist, you should automatically think of the word farmers right there during this time period. So populist, populism would be the farmers or things that would be in the best interest of the farmers, such as unlimited coinage of silver, federal ownership of the railroads, graduated income tax, and direct election of senators. All of these will happen except for the coinage of silver. The progressives come in the next several years and kind of take a lot of these ideas and put them into fruition. Our last vocabulary term to associate with the Gilded Age is urbanization, urban, the cities. Our cities grow rapidly during the Gilded Age. And some of the problems would be, of course, overproduction. Are you way down here and not up there? Who knows? Just go with it, y'all. Overproduction, we will see unsanitary living and working conditions. I don't know why they're typing so big, but just go with it. We'll just talk about it. You will see the tenements, the crowded living conditions in the cities. You will see corruption, crime, pollution. The cities were a hot, hot mess. And then you're going to see some of the other social issues, such as immigration, the new versus old immigrants. The Chinese Exclusion Act is going to be passed, and it's the first immigration law in U.S. history. Women will begin to fight for the right to vote or suffrage. Child labor will be a significant issue. And of course, minorities will begin the fight for equality. Jim Crow laws were still heavily prevalent during the Gilded Age. One name in particular to note would be W.E.B. Du Bois, who is one of the co-founders of the NAACP and begins that fight for equality.